I'm standing in front of Sanford Dam. You can see it just over my shoulder here. And I want to thank everybody for liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Also a big thank you to my Patreon, John, and for people sending me letters through the mail. I will pop my P.O. box up on the screen right now if anyone wants to send me anything there. Let me turn the camera around now, and we'll focus a little bit more here on Sanford Dam. So last week was the 1-year anniversary of when the dams failed. There was a lot of celebration and rebuilding down in the village of Sanford. I'll talk about that a little bit later as we head downtown. And also at the end of this video again, I will be providing the engineering diagrams and details and going over those. Work is going to be starting here very soon. Work is actually going to be starting at all of these dams very soon, and many of the dams are going to be worked on simultaneously. So we are seeing a ton of progress happening right now. And if you want to follow along with the day-to-day activities, my live cameras for these dams are in the description down below. Make sure you check those out. I have a live camera here on Sanford Dam, 2 on the Edenville Dam, and 1 over on the Tobacco River Dam. I have some exciting news about a second live camera here for Sanford Dam as well. I will cover that when I go over on the other side of this dam. But right here we have Sanford Dam. The 3 powerhouse turbines would be down in this area. Spillways are here. Gates are all the way retracted up as high as they can be. Over here is what used to be Sanford Lake. It is now covered in weeds and cottonwood trees. It's a little bit chilly out today. We've had a couple 80-degree weather days, so things are really starting to look green. A little bit of debris out here on the lake bed yet. That will all be cleared up and cleaned up before this lake is allowed to refill. Hopefully, I know many people have said it down in the comments down below as well, they are able to use some of the sand from the lake bed to refill the embankment. And this will actually make Sanford Lake a little bit deeper, but this might actually not be possible. It all depends on the environmental impact of what removing the sand from the lake bed would have on the lake, and if the DNR, DEQ, a lot of these environmental protection agencies will allow to happen. I know the contractors that will be doing the work, redoing the embankment, refilling that back in before Sanford Lake is allowed to refill, they would much rather be able to pull the sand from the lake bed and use that than having to truck all that in. So we'll see what happens there. And off in the distance, this is US 10 highway. Let's head on over to the other side of the dam here, check out the park area, and give you an update of what's happening over there. I'm over here on the back side of the dam now. See how low the water is over here on this side. This used to be the old substation that is now being dismantled. There was some news last week that Secord, Smallwood, and Sanford Dam have been relinquished from FERC's control. So these dams are no longer under federal control, and they have now handed that power over to the state. And over this direction, this is Sanford Falls. That's where the water is going around through the embankment where the failure happened. Up here, these concrete structures are the old auxiliary emergency spillways. And a few guys down here fishing, so fishing is still pretty good. But yeah, this is actually a very interesting spot. Make sure you stay tuned to the end of this video where I go over the engineering diagrams and details. They're actually going to be filling in this area where all this water is to be able to truck over the sand to fill this embankment back in. Also, there's a lot of people that are always asking what equipment I'm using. I always post that in the description down below. And if you click those links and purchase something from Amazon, it doesn't even have to be the item that I actually link to. I actually do get a kickback, so it's another way for you to be able to support the channel just through those Amazon links. Now, over here is the Sanford Park. So work is going to be happening on the park at the same time that this dam is being worked on. So both projects are going to be happening simultaneously. They're still getting bids for who's going to be awarded this work, but it's kind of exciting that this park is going to be rebuilt. You know, this was all baseball, softball fields out here, and now it's kind of just grown up into grass and weeds, some cottonwood trees. Playground still over there. This is Saginaw Road that you see in the background, so it's going to be very exciting. And the news about the live camera that I want to share with you guys is we do have funding for a second live camera. Funding has been provided by Fisher Contracting, so really great, really appreciate their support that they're able to come through and fund another camera. This camera is going to be going right in this area, so we'll be able to see all the park work going on live on my YouTube channel, as well as the camera will be able to see all the work happening over here on Sanford Dam. So stay tuned for that. I'm hopefully going to be getting that set up soon, hopefully within the next month, definitely before work begins here though. Now I'm going to go ahead, get the drone up in the air, and we'll see what the view is from there, and then we'll head on down to the village and tell you how things are progressing over there as well. Jumping into some of this drone video now, I'm actually facing towards the north, circling around the backside of Sanford Dam. We can see the old substation on the right hand side and one of those old turbine housings sitting there in blue. The backside of the spillways look pretty damaged as well and scoured. Now I'm up at 400 feet in altitude facing to the north again, and we are looking over the Sanford Lake bed. It looks very green and lush in this area. It is springtime here. Way off in the distance up there in the right hand corner you could catch the Tittabawassee River as well. That's the north, and this is the Tittabawassee River flowing towards the south, and the Sanford Dam up here near the top of the screen, and Sanford Park behind the dam there. We are now behind the Sanford Dam, kind of flying towards the north up the river. This guy over here on the right hand side looks like he's fishing. A couple birds flying in front of the camera, but I'm going to do my typical flyover pass shot above Sanford Falls. I've been monitoring this area, making sure and kind of documenting how the erosion is happening here. Over the past year, this clay has really eroded quite a bit. Clay is our bedrock here in Michigan, and we can see there isn't much flow of water coming through here, just a little bit right now. We haven't got a whole lot of rainfall in the last couple days, but there's quite a decent amount of rapids right here, and as I pan over here to the right, we'll actually start to see Sanford Dam come into view as I gain altitude a little bit further. This sandbank over here right in front of the camera is a favorite of the bank swallows. It's probably what you see flying in front of the camera right now. They like to make their nest and hatch their babies in there. And now as I come around the embankment here on the right hand side, there's a couple geese over here. No goslings with them, none of their babies. There is actually quite a few in this area of freshly hatched goslings, though. I actually do like to watch them with the live camera. Make sure you check out the Sanford live camera view. It's definitely a great one, very peaceful area, and lots of wildlife to always see out there. Here's these 5 geese down here in the bottom corner, and I'm going to go ahead and pan around, and we'll see Sanford Dam come into view over here on the right-hand side now. This dam had 6 gated spillways and 3 turbines directly beneath the powerhouse that used to generate power. Like I said, make sure you stay tuned to the end of this video, and I'll show you guys how they are going to be modifying this powerhouse when the dam is rebuilt. Again, back up at 400 feet in altitude, now kind of facing towards the southwest, Sanford Dam in the bottom left-hand corner, and I am dropping in altitude. We can see the concrete structures in the embankment right here in the middle of the screen. Those concrete structures used to be the old auxiliary emergency spillways, and Sanford Falls is right there as well. That's where the water is flowing through the embankment in this area now, and actually where the dam ended up failing. You can see on the right hand side of the screen too where a lot of the trees were just shoved over and washed out when the embankment failed. Here's a good view of Sanford Park as well. A lot of the t-ball, baseball fields used to be in this area. That's a scoreboard down in the bottom right hand side of the screen that I just went by as well. There still remains a play gym right here in the center of the screen as well. And Saginaw Road is going from east to west in the background. That's that roadway. And over here on the right hand side used to be a couple more baseball and softball fields that used to be right by the Tittabawassee River. I'm now downtown in the village of Sanford, and like I said, there were so many events that happened here last week. I'm here at the Red Oak restaurant, but up the street there's the Ellis Party Store Marathon gas station that's now open. They also had a hot air balloon that was down there this week. As I turn around this way, you can see the hardware is open. The Welcome to Sanford sign is back up. This Welcome to Sanford sign was a pivotal moment in the rebuilding here in Sanford Village. It's kind of a landmark, and it was great to get that restored. Like I said, over here is the hardware. I'm gonna pop in here, show you guys what they offer real quick. You know, if you're in the area, make sure you stop in. It's always great to support local businesses. And I'm actually supporting one of the local businesses here in Sanford, Finney Excavating, who's actually going to be doing all of the excavating for our house when we go to build it. If you want to follow along with that, make sure you go check out my other YouTube channel. The link for that is in the description down below, and I'll also pop it up on the screen. But let's head on in here now. Lots of Milwaukee products. It's definitely a lot bigger than it used to be. Pretty much anything that you were interested in you can find in here now. Lots of hardware and bolts. Plumbing over here on the left. Lighting here in the back. Some Traeger grills, chainsaws. And this is all paint over here. So right here at the checkout counter, you can see this table that's here is actually representing the Sanford Rising, kind of like the rising sun over Sanford. And then over here at the Sanford Veterans Memorial and First Responders Monument, the dedication for this was last week as well on Wednesday. I did film the entire thing. I actually live streamed this to my Facebook channel. But yeah, this was really cool and great to see this dedication. We have Porty Park back here in the background as well. Porty Park is named after the Sanford Village president, Dolores Porty. I also did an interview with her last week. That was the last video I posted if you missed that. Yeah, this is the Veterans Memorial. The flag that used to be flying here. This was found buried in the rubble. And we have a couple more flags over here. This is the rail trail that runs right along here, runs right through Sanford. And these flags are right behind the rail trail. So if you do want to see the entire dedication and memorial, that's when Annette Glenn actually released that she was introducing a bill for $500 million, $250 million of which will be coming to rebuild the dams. I will link that video in the description down below. They're actually mowing Porty Park right now. Lots of new ideas for what this park will become, but it's definitely going to be a great spot to hang out in for the Sanford Village to be able to come. Yeah, this area used to be all houses. If you remember last year, me walking through here, maybe I'll actually pop some of that video on. Some drone video showing all the houses that used to be in this area. It isn't a floodplain, so they're not able to rebuild there now. But they did turn it into a nice looking park. And on the other side from the memorial, we do have the Sanford Memorial Heart. I'll actually head over that way now. Here's all the memorial hearts. These were painted last week at the 1-year anniversary. And then over here across the road is the new community garden. So hopefully these get planted really soon. We'll start to see some new flowers and vegetables coming up here. Yeah, things are looking great. I actually jump on over to some drone video now of the park and actually show some video from last week. The bridal show, the hot air balloon that I was talking about, and that memorial dedication. Maybe a couple other photos and videos as well.
So pretty.
Here's a couple shots of the hot air balloon. This night they were just doing a glow, so they weren't actually going to fly the hot air balloon. But the next day they were going to go ahead and launch these. And again, here is some video from the drone at nighttime. So kind of that dusk time frame that it was really easy to see the glow emitted by that hot air balloon. Now I'm going to go ahead and kind of pan the camera to the left, and we'll be able to see down Saginaw Road that runs directly through Sanford. In the middle of the screen here, there was a DJ playing some music, so definitely a lot of good times were had this weekend. Kind of sad and somber at the same time because 1 year ago is when the dams failed. Many people lost their houses. We were very fortunate that no one lost their lives, but it is kind of more of a celebration about Sanford rising up from the destruction that happened last year and just kind of rebuilding. Over here on the right hand side that's really bright lit up is the Ellis Party Store Marathon gas station. Auto Value over on the left hand side. Jack's Hometown Pizza was back there behind the camera as well, the other side of the drone. And right here in the middle, Red Oak Restaurant. There's a little bit of a party time going on there with another DJ, little dance party. Cole's Towing over on the left-hand side has been a huge help as well. And up here, the new white roof is the new Sanford Hardware. You can see the memorial, the new Veterans and First Responders Memorial on the left-hand side of the screen over there as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and fly over Sanford Park. Looked pretty barren right now. Definitely were quite a few more people down here this weekend, though, checking things out. And it's going to be a lot of progress in the next couple weeks, like I said. Hopefully we'll be breaking ground, rebuilding a new park, breaking ground, and rebuilding these dams. This is a view overlooking Sanford Lake and the dam again. And this is just one last look of the hot air balloon looking down Saginaw Road. I did go back in the daytime and filmed a little bit more. This is the Ellis Party Store again. Looks like they're accepting some Alaskan Amber, probably filling up that huge walk-in fridge. And now we're heading back towards the west down Saginaw Road. Again, Cole's Towing down here on the bottom left. Red Oak Restaurant over on the right-hand side of the screen. And in the middle of the screen, up near the top, is the new Sanford Hardware. We can start to see the new Sanford welcome sign, and it's reading out the temperature in degrees Celsius as well as degrees Fahrenheit and the current time. Go ahead and swing around the back side of the sign as well. Take a little bit closer up look at the new hardware, and then we'll drop down in altitude and come up right behind the sign. You can see behind the hardware there is a lot more supplies than I showed inside as well. They do have a lot of softener salt, a few bigger items that do not actually fit in the store as well in the stock behind there. So like I said, we're going to drop down in altitude, come right up behind the Sanford sign. It's great that this sign is backlit up and reading temperature and time because after having been down for almost a year, it is sure great driving through the village and seeing this new sign of hope. This next shot is of Porty Park. So since I was here last time, things sure are looking a lot more green. The new grass is germinated and is growing pretty well. I will show a comparison as well now where the houses that used to be in this area stood. Now we're jumping back to June 2nd of 2020, and this is that exact location where Porty Park is currently now. Not much of a resemblance. You can maybe make out where some of the trees still are to get your bearings straight, but other than that, all these houses and foundations have been removed, and the new grass planted right over where these houses once stood. This video was taken just a couple weeks after the dams failed. And now I'm kind of facing towards the south, panning up, and it just looks like a tornado completely went through this area and wiped everything out. You can just see the Tittabawassee River here in the background. And now I'm coming over here. We have the Sanford Veterans and First Responders Memorial, and it is really great to see all these flags flying, but you do definitely have to take a step back and remember our veterans and the first responders. I'm definitely going to be going back here when we have a little bit windier day and watching and seeing these flags fly. So now coming from the Sanford Veterans Memorial and First Responders Memorial, panning the camera up towards the north, and I will start to fly over towards the Memorial Heart. This memorial heart was made for Sanford, and it was pretty great seeing all the new additions to it this last weekend. Lots of new names on there. Everyone kind of put their own personal touch on each one of their hearts. This heart is located right at the entrance to the Sanford Village Park. We can see Sanford Dam and the Sanford Lake bed in the background near the top of the screen. And these are the new community gardens. There was also a house that stood in this area that wasn't able to be rebuilt as it is in a floodplain now. Now I'm going to go ahead and pan the camera over towards the left-hand side and drop down in altitude, not directly above the power line that I'm flying on top of right now, but as soon as I get over to the other side of this power line, I will start dropping in altitude and we'll take a closer up look of the Sanford Memorial Heart. The heart does have Sanford Strong wrote across the top of it, and Sanford sure is one strong community. I don't know if there's another stronger one out there, but there's been a ton of strength and overcoming in the last year. On the left-hand side of this heart, there is also a book drop-off, one of those take a book, leave a books. So that's a pretty cool addition to the park as well. And now I'm up at 400 feet in altitude again, able to take in the whole Sanford Lake bed, Sanford Dam, the fall area, and as I pan down, we are able to see the entire park. Hopefully the next time I'm filming in this area, there's probably going to be some construction here on rebuilding of this park. Most of the park rebuild is being funded by grants. I'm going to go ahead and tilt the camera back up again, and this is where the Sanford Historical Museum is, right there near the top of the screen as well. I'm going to cover a few of the quick facts before we jump into the engineering diagrams and details. The Sanford cost to repair is $51 million. The number of waterfront properties around Sanford Lake is 944. The estimated lake return date is mid-2025, and the estimated annual capital assessment range is $1,637. This number is actually a little bit less than they originally estimated, so that's a good sign that they were actually able to go back, reassess this, and bring the cost back down a little bit. I'm going to hand over the presentation to Paul and Ron from the Four Lakes Task Force now, and let them present the engineering diagrams and details.
Again, my name is Paul Drew. I'm a senior water resources engineer with GEI. And not only am I the project manager for this project, but the other three Four Lakes projects as we go forward. So in terms of flood damage from May of 2020, I'm not going to get too far into the technical portion of the project until we can just go over some general geometry and language and how we talk about these projects. So in the dam safety world, everything is left to right looking downstream. So I know the first slide here might be a little bit confusing when I'm talking about the left embankment and it's on the right side of the screen, and the right embankment's on the left side of the screen. But that's just for consistency as we're looking downstream. But the main features of the project are the left embankment, the former powerhouse, which used to have 3 generating units, the Tanner Gate spillway, the concrete spillway in the center that was used to pass normal and flood flows and maintain lake levels in the Sanford impoundment, the right earthen embankment, and the former fuse plug spillway. I bring up the fuse plug spillway for a number of reasons. Those spillways are typically designed to erode a portion of the embankment during large flood events to create additional spill capacity and flood pools. There are a number of prescribed steps that generally need to occur in order for these structures to work. However, during the May 2020 flood event, the fuse plug spillway did not initiate as originally intended or designed, which led to a severe lack of spillway capacity during that flood. The former right embankment to the right of that fuse plug did breach, and currently all the flood flow in the Tittabawassee River is bypassing the Tanner Gate spillway and head cutting this new breach channel on the far right side of the project. Next slide, please. So in the interim conditions, we're working to stabilize this project. As Dave mentioned, the schedule is going to be a couple of years before Sanford Dam is built. So this work is going to be done in conjunction with the NRCS. The NRCS has identified that stabilizing this project may be eligible for EWP program funding. And what that means is that the NRCS would pay up to 75% of the engineering and construction fees to stabilize this work. And so we're working on negotiations with the NRCS, and we're hoping that this plan is at least started here in 2021. But what that will include is we are going to stabilize that existing breach channel. And by stabilizing that channel, I mean we're going to be placing large riprap and steel sheet piling to reduce that erosion and current head cutting of the breach channel to minimize sediment and other materials from washing downstream in the interim. The goal here would be that we can pass up to the 200-year flood event in this stabilized condition. So it buys us a few years while this project remains in this state. And again, all of the work that and I guess in addition to the stabilization of the current dam, there is a large amount of sediment downstream of the project, as well as some upland areas that have been identified as potential cleanup areas that will be done in conjunction with this work. And then lastly, as we're constructing this, as part of the interim stabilization, all of the materials that we're planning on placing here will be retrofitted and used as part of the long-term reconstruction. So goal of spending now and building this this year, we'll be reusing it to save funds as we go to fully restoring this down the line. Next slide, please. And on this page, mostly because I couldn't fit it on the previous page, Dave mentioned there's a large amount of debris upstream in the watershed coming from the Edenville Dam failure as well as the Sanford failure. So we're proposing to construct a debris boom across the Tittabawassee River downstream of our project. And the goal here is that this boom would collect that debris during maybe spring runoff or smaller flood events, where we have a contractor mobilized to the site that could access the debris from behind this boom, remove it, and manage it here before it works its way downstream. We're working through this with Eagle right now. There's a concern that a boom across the river might hold up too much debris or even cause flooding upstream by slowing the river down. Built into this system is actually basically a break or a fuse link that if the river gets too high or the debris behind it gets too large, the boom itself actually breaks. And once the flood recedes, we'll be able to go back in and reconnect it as it was before a large flood event. So we're hoping this goes in as well this year. Potentially debris boom would go in first and then the upstream stabilization to follow, but still working out those scheduling and those details. Next slide, please. So in terms of, as Dave mentioned, the long-term restoration, the primary goal is to get the embankments rebuilt with new spillways, but ultimately to restore Sanford Lake back to its legal lake level. So with that, the main component is increasing spillway capacity to make sure that we can manage the design storms, these large design storms that the state requires, as well as reconstructing the embankment. So in regards to spillway capacity, Sanford Dam is classified as a high hazard dam. And a high hazard dam basically means that it has a large population downstream at risk of potential life loss, as well as a significant amount of downstream infrastructure that could be severely impacted by a failure of the dam. So this was all highlighted very well back in May of 2020. Thankfully, no one was killed, but there was significant amount of downstream damage and environmental impacts. So the project itself will remain a high hazard dam, but the spillway capacity issue needs to be upgraded. At the time of the failure, the total capacity was about 36,000 cubic feet per second, or CFS, before the dam would be overtopped. At the time, the state of Michigan had a requirement that any project for a high hazard dam had to pass what's called the half probable maximum flood, which we'll talk about in a minute. And that capacity requirement was about 37,000 CFS. So it Sanford Dam generally met their spillway requirement. However, as we talked about before, the fuse plug spillway did not initiate, so the capacity was at a deficit during this flood. And based on our current studies and understanding of the May 2020 flood event, we think this PMF, or this half PMF number, is going to significantly increase. And right now, based on our current studies, we're estimating that that spillway capacity requirement is going to go up to nearly 48,000 or 47,500 CFS. And these spillway requirements are being finalized based on a number of factors. The first is the Four Lakes Task Force has decided it's in the best interest to update the probable maximum precipitation and probable maximum flood study. And what these mean are, for this watershed, that's the largest amount of rainfall or the largest flood possible, realistically possible, for the Sanford watershed. So FERC, who is the regulator for any hydropower dams and the former regulator for the Sanford Dam, had a full PMF requirement. Eagle has a half PMF requirement. Where this gets a little bit complicated is, following the failure, the state of Michigan formed a dam safety task force, not to be confused with the Four Lakes Task Force, and their goal was to review all of the dam safety regulations for the state and ultimately provide new recommendations for new regulations, meaning the half PMF requirement is likely going to increase. So with these requirements in flux, we are proceeding with our 30% design with draft numbers, with an idea that these spillway requirements are going to change, and we're building in conservatism into our designs to a point where we can be flexible once Eagle adopts whatever the Dam Safety Task Force recommends. What we're hearing so far is that the Dam Safety Task Force is going to suggest or recommend that a risk-based flood study would be required to determine whatever the final spillway capacity criteria is. And so on the next slide, I'm going to talk about what a risk-based flood study looks like. So this is a bit of a complicated topic, but I'm going to break it down into the simplest form. What Eagle is doing is they are aligning their approach with current FEMA guidelines for selecting design criteria for spillway capacity. And a risk-based approach generally has two main components. The first is to understand or quantify the consequences of a dam failing versus a dam not failing. And by consequences, I mean who would be at risk in terms of residential houses, whether it's the flood depth or the velocity of the flow, to determine how many people downstream are at risk in the case of a failure. So for a small figure one on the left kind of illustrates this relationship. The blue line is consequences assuming a dam fails, and the red line assuming a dam does not fail. And you see on the left on figure one that for a small storm, the gap between the two is very large. And the reason for this is during a normal storm, the dam is operating as it should, downstream flooding is minimal, and if a dam were to fail in that condition, there will be a lot more people that would see a consequence of that failure. But when you start talking about these half PMF or full PMF storms, when there's so much downstream flooding concurrently with the dam, sometimes it turns out that the consequences of a failure and the consequences of a not failure can either be nearly identical. And so we go through this process to quantify what these risks are and these consequences, and then we tie that to the probability of that event occurring. And we're able to decide if there's a storm where no additional consequences would happen, and that storm is called the inflow design flood, or the IDF. And so this process is not true for all projects, but is generally the starting point for risk-based decision criteria that we would present to the regulators or Eagle. Here are the consequences between the two scenarios, and here's the probability of that storm or that failure occurring, and we can present a risk-based design criteria recommendation and wait for Eagle to approve it. So this is a long way of saying the design criteria is not set. but we're going through the prescribed procedures needed to come up with a risk-based design criteria that meets the current FEMA requirements and potentially the new requirements for the state. Next slide, please. So instead of just talking about it, I think this is actually a really good project to illustrate the effects of an IDF or a risk-based approach. These are photographs of May 19th, 2020, right before the failure. So the photograph on the upper left is showing the relationship between the headwater in the Sanford Lake impoundment and the tailwater downstream of the dam. So before any overtopping of the embankments occurred, you kind of get a sense here that the headwater and the tailwater were pretty close to each other, maybe 5 or 6 feet different. And the reason for that is downstream of Sanford, the tailwater comes up very quickly because the floodplain is very low relative to the upper higher lands in the floodplain. And the second picture here is right when an overtopping was just starting. You can see that to the right of the Tanner Gate spillway, the right embankment was just starting to overtop. And then downstream of the left embankment, which was also overtopping, the switch yard, which is connected to the powerhouse, was inundated by 6 to 7 feet pre-failure. And then lastly, the bottom picture, this is the FEMA floodplain. So what FEMA does is they map out the inundation limits for a 100-year storm. And by 100-year storm, which is very commonly misunderstood, it's not a 1 in 100-year storm. It's basically for any given year, it has 1 out of 100 chance of happening. But if you compare that to a half PMF or a full PMF, the probability is much lower. Maybe it's 1 out of 100,000 in any given year of happening. And so in this case, if you go back to figure 1, during a 100-year flood, maybe the consequence is closer to the left on that plot, where the low tailwater would have extreme consequences if the dam failed. But during a half or full PMF, that number is probably much further to the right on that plot because of the downstream flooding that's already occurring, whether the dam fails or not. So as we do our studies and we finalize this, we're going to be able to quantify the number of consequences as well as the probability of that happening and use this information to come up with a risk-based approach on how big our spillway capacity needs to be. Next slide, thank you. So in terms of what the critical repair items are, just in summary, the right embankment was breached and needs to be reconstructed. The right embankment will be completely redone with a new seepage cutoff wall and internal drainage layers to protect against seepage-induced internal erosion. The Tanner Gate spillway will be retrofitted with new crest gates to increase spillway capacity. And lastly, a new auxiliary spillway will be constructed in the location of the current breach channel to further increase spill capacity. So as part of what we're doing now and as we go forward, a number of geotechnical investigations, structural analyses, and hydraulic analyses are required to support the design of all of these new structures. And all structures will be designed to meet current state and federal dam safety standards. Next slide. So the next number of slides are our 30% design drawings and just basically laying out what we're proposing to do. So working from the left side, looking downstream, we're gonna have new crest-gated spillways, and I'll show you what those look like. The right embankment will be completely reconstructed. In the location of the current breach channel will be a new labyrinth overflow auxiliary spillway with a discharge channel to convey flows down to the Tidwallacy River. And then to the right of that, there's the last segment of the right embankment that will be tied into the former right abutment. Next slide. So what I mentioned crest gates, you see on the right side of this page or on the left side looking downstream, the powerhouse bay currently has 3 bays for 3 turbines. We're proposing to demolish 2/3 of that and only have 1 bay remaining, which will turn into a low-level outlet to pass base flows and flows in the winter. And those slots where the powerhouse used to be will be an addition of 2 new crest gate bays, and the former 6 Tanner Gate bays will be retrofitted with new crest gates. Crest gates are designed to increase spillway capacity because they sit at a lower elevation than the former Tanner gates. And the picture on the far right the bottom right, shows crest gates in the up position. And the next slide is a little bit more detail on what one of these looks like. So in cross-section view here, you'll see that crest gates have two main positions. In the up position, which is the photograph on the right, this is when normal base flow, everything can be passed through the low level outlet. Maybe depending on the flow rates, some of these are partially down just to pass that base river flow. But during large storm events, these gates are controlled hydraulically with minimal operation or human operation required. And so you see on the bottom right, there's two crest gates side by side. The one on the right side of the page is full down, and the one on the right side of the page is starting to collapse to pass additional flood flows. So these are going to operate basically opposite of what the former Tanner Gate spillways operated as. The one difference here is because there is no Tanner Gate to block navigation, there will be a new navigation boom built upstream to promote recreational and boater safety to keep folks away from these gates that fold down. Next slide. All right, so on this picture, this is highlighting where the embankments will be completely reconstructed following the failure. The new embankments will be raised to a higher elevation to provide freeboard during large storm events when the lake comes up. The crest will be widened, and both the upstream and downstream slopes will be flattened to provide greater stability of these earthen embankments. And then lastly, on the upstream side of that, there will be a new steel sheet pile cutoff wall that will be driven to prevent against seepage. And then any seepage that does get through our impervious wall, there will be an internal drainage system to provide the seepage a direct path to the reservoir in a controlled manner. Just to note, all dams seep, but if you build it correctly and you have these control measures to mitigate the risk of internal seepage and erosion. Next slide, please. And here's a general cross section of what that new embankment is going to look like. Generally speaking, since this is basically a new structure that we're building, it's to the state of the practice for embankment design. As I mentioned, on the upstream side, it has riprap to protect against waves and erosion for fluctuating lake levels. There's a new steel sheet pile cutoff wall constructed as an impervious layer to protect against seepage. Immediately downstream of that, there's this new internal drainage system that any seepage that does come into the embankment would be discharged in a controlled manner. New embankment fill compacted to the requirements for slope stability. And then downstream of that, there will be new riprap and tow protection to protect against high tailwater or scour during large flood events. And then lastly, what we're calling this labyrinth auxiliary spillway. It helps solve the problem that we saw in the May 2020 failure, where this structure is completely passive. And by passive, we mean there's no human intervention. We don't have to rely on a fuse plug to work as it designed. If water gets up to this level, it's dumped over this spillway in a controlled manner, as generally the auxiliary spillway should be. This odd accordion shape is basically set in this configuration to provide a more efficient spillway capacity per linear foot than a typical linear overflow weir spillway. This design basically is there for when you need a lot of discharge in a smaller footprint to minimize cost and restrictions of the site to pass that auxiliary spillway requirement in this location. On the bottom right, this is an example labyrinth spillway that we designed and constructed in northern Minnesota for the same purpose. This only discharges during the full PMF. And as we're intending to design here at Sanford, this structure will only discharge in severe emergency situations. We're relying on the crest gates to pass most flood flow, but during the design flood, this will discharge. And then lastly, similar to the embankment cross section, this is just showing all the features similar to the embankment in cross section view. So flow on this page is from left to right. You can see that it just dumps over that labyrinth spillway cycle at the design elevation. It's conveyed downstream through a concrete spillway chute and eventually to a rock line channel to get into the Tittabawassee River. And the bottom right picture is just another view of the same spillway in northern Minnesota. I think that's it for my slides. I think Ron Hansen will take us the rest of the way.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Ron Hansen. I'm an engineer for the Four Lakes Task Force. I work with Spicer Group, headquartered in Saginaw. I want to spend time today talking about the scheduling and the timing. So there are scheduling and timing considerations and constraints. First of all, we all have a duty of care to keep people safe. The Four Lakes Task Force is committed to meeting dam safety, and the community is committed to safety. So there's a significant amount of work that's being done to ensure that we're stabilizing the dams in the interim basis, and then long-term constructing dams that meet dam safety. So in addition to all of the engineering that Paul had just outlined, there's also a timeline for receiving regulatory permits, financial approval, and establishment of the assessment roles and the county approval. In short, we're following Part 307, the Michigan statute that outlines legal lake levels and outlines the procedures that we have to follow. In addition to that, we are going to be working with the United States Department of Agriculture for financing assistance, and they have requirements as well. What we're trying to do to keep the schedule moving as quickly as possible is run as many activities in parallel to get to construction as quickly as we can. Excuse me. So the engineering design phase. Engineering is more than just the design and building of the dam. There's significant efforts that also include modeling, environmental impact studies, and permitting. And on this slide, it provides a summary of all of the steps that go into the engineering design phase. So on the next slide, before we can start construction, there are things that need to happen. Number one, there's an independent forensics investigation report that is being administered. This is not part of the Four Lakes Task Force scope. This is as directed by FEMA, and we're all awaiting the findings of that forensic investigation. As far as engineering goes, we have to prepare preliminary engineering reports. Those will need to be submitted to USDA and various regulatory agencies. We have to establish the design, the inflow design flood based on the risk-based analysis that Paul had highlighted in his presentation. Finally, we would have to do final engineering design and construction plans. Also, before we begin construction, there's the submittal and approval to USDA for funding. There is environmental studies and environmental permitting. There's a bid letting process and a computation of cost. There are special assessment hearings, appeals to special assessment, and a process for the county to approve the special assessment role. So on this next slide, we have a detailed timeline for each of the steps. What I want to emphasize here is this timeline assumes that we will secure financing through USDA, and it also is contingent upon the initial engineering being funded through grants. And there are 4 tracks. There's the recovery track, the financing track, the engineering track, and the bid letting track. And upon the completion of these 4 tracks, then we can get into construction. So highlighted in yellow is the recovery track. That is underway. That includes the interim dam stabilization measures, the debris boom, and the debris management that Paul talked about. So to highlight that recovery track, on December 7th of 2020, the property was transferred or acquired from Boyce Hydro. So also in October of 2020, measures for interim stabilization started to occur. You noticed immediately, as quickly as we could, we removed the debris from the upstream face of the Sanford Dam. That work is completed. Currently, we are working with the NRCS to secure funding for interim dam stabilization and additional debris removal. We anticipate that process to culminate in May of 2022. Financing is in the blue track. In May of 2021, the Four Lakes Task Force will be presenting the feasibility study report to the community and to the counties. This report will outline the design concepts in more detail, but generally outline what Paul has presented here, along with associated cost and anticipated special assessments and a summary of funding and financing. We will receive input from the community on that feasibility study, and we anticipate in January of 2022 to submit an application to the United States Department of Agriculture for financing. This is essentially getting a loan from the government. They have a process to review preliminary engineering reports and review environmental reports and ultimately approve the project for financing. We anticipate that to end in May of 2023. After we get the approval for financing, then the USDA needs to be provided with final plans, final permits, and all of the necessary, show that all of the necessary procedures and standards are met, and then they can obligate funding. We anticipate that to occur in August of 2023. While we're working with the USDA on the financing, we also have the engineering track. Right now on the engineering track, what we're working on is the probable maximum precipitation and probable maximum flood studies. Those are ongoing. We're anticipating the initial report of those studies in June of 2021. Upon receiving that report, we will be reviewing that and submitting it to the regulatory agencies for their acceptance. In addition to the probable maximum flood studies, there's also the inflow design flood study. This is the risk-based analysis that was highlighted in Paul's presentation, where that is currently ongoing, and we're anticipating that to be completed in September of 2021. Again, that would be submitted to the regulatory agencies for their acceptance and approval. We are anticipating that to be in January of 2022. At such time, we can begin design engineering. Design engineering is scheduled from January 2022 to May of 2023. We also have environmental studies. There will be a significant effort in environmental reviews and environmental permitting that will occur from May of 2021 to May of 2023. This will culminate in the Four Lakes Task Force applying for environmental permits to construct the dam. Those applications would be submitted in May of 2023, and we would anticipate getting the environmental permits in November of 2023. There's also the bid letting phase. The bid letting would occur after the environmental permits are secured. During the bid letting phase, we would advertise, provide construction plans and advertise to qualified contractors to receive construction bids. And then we would also, during that bid letting phase, be conducting a special assessment hearing process. This is the process where the property owners around Sanford Lake would be provided notice for a special assessment hearing. You would come in, review what your apportionment for the project would be. After we get through those hearings, then it would be provided to the County Board of Commissioners for final approval. After we get through that approval process, we can then issue a notice to proceed for construction. And then we would enter into the construction phase. So as you can see, this is a very time-consuming and complicated process, and we appreciate your patience during this process.
Thanks for watching, and make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next videos I will be posting, and leave your questions, comments, and suggestions below. As always, I just want to give a massive thanks to the people who support me on Patreon. Never underestimate the value of your contribution to keeping this channel going. Thank you.